building off of that athlete-centered approach is looking at motivation from a psychology perspective, because every athlete tends to fall somewhere along a line of this continuum here of motivation. So just briefly, at the far left, we've got amotivation, which is just a absence of motivation. And in the middle along the continuum is extrinsic motivation, where the athlete might be motivated by external sources, so things like punishment or rewards from the coach or approval from others. And at the far right of the scale, we have the most autonomous form of motivation, intrinsic motivation. So this is where the athlete is motivated through their own interest and their inherent enjoyment of the activity. So with each individual athlete, we want to understand where they might fall on this scale and help them achieve a more autonomous or self-determined form of motivation. So because although internal pressure and rewards might be motivating in the short term, external pressure or rewards might be more motivating in the short term, the internal motivation is considered to be the most effective for long-term and more self-sustained motivation. So moving on. So according to the research, the extent to which 3 basic psychological needs are fulfilled determine where the athlete falls along that motivation continuum. So when these 3 needs are supported, athletes are more likely to have that self-determined or intrinsic form of motivation. So we're going to look at what each of these needs are and what it would look like in training to support these needs. So the first being autonomy, which is the extent to which the athlete feels they have choice in their environment. So by allowing space for athlete autonomy in your training context, you can help support the athlete's motivation. And some basic ways of supporting this can be to offer athletes a choice or say in decision-making and planning, and to ask for their input when it's appropriate. So while older or adult athletes may have a greater capacity to be involved in some of those decision-making processes, I do want to emphasize that this is something that can be done with all ages. So with younger athletes, it might be simply offering a choice between 2 different drills when you had a skill that you plan to work on. Another example is that I worked with a group of 10-year-olds once and had them come up with expectations for each other as teammates at the beginning of the year, rather than it just coming from me and me telling them what to do. So they were actually really great with this and came up with things like expecting each other to come to practice on time, showing respect and being nice, so things like that. And with older athletes, you might give them a greater amount of autonomy, and I'm going to let Poonam talk about what that looked like with her athletes.
Yeah, so for us this season, as I mentioned before, we were working on decision-making and confidence. And communication was a bit of an issue as well after our youth sport season. So during our off-season time, we train in the local women's league and we play games against the Premier Division teams. So my assistant coach and I, we decided to silence ourselves on the sidelines and basically take a silent coach approach, as we called it. We did this because we wanted to increase the communication on the field from the athletes and allow them to work through some of the situations and problems that they were coming, they were faced with during our regular season. I was inspired to do this because I'd heard, rugby has these captains-led training sessions before major events and major competitions as a way for the team to connect. I also had seen that, the England women's head coach during the Rio 2016 Olympics was actually sitting on the sidelines, was sitting with the crowd as opposed to sitting on the sideline, and had their assistant coach leading the bench. And so, examples like this kind of got me thinking that, this might be it might be challenging in the beginning, but it might be a good approach to take, to allow the team to come together and really work through those problems themselves and as a group, rather than always looking to the sideline and looking to the coaches to provide them with the appropriate feedback immediately. It was a struggle in the beginning, but it was a really great experience. In between, we were able to take feedback from the athletes and make adjustments where it was needed. And, happy to say that at the end, we made the finals, which we hadn't made in a few years. And so we made the finals in the Vancouver Women's Premier Division. Unfortunately, COVID-19 didn't let us compete in that game. But I think, it really went to show that taking steps like this, which are a bit scary in the beginning, really helped the team grow together and helped better their communication.
All right, so moving on to that second need is competence, which is the extent to which an athlete feels they're capable of being successful in their environment. So to support this, coaches can focus on the athlete's individual skill development and progression. So things like highlighting effort and some of those small changes week to week, and focusing on progress rather than only mistakes. So with the women's field hockey team, we use this approach to build their confidence a little bit as well. So focusing on things that they were able to do well. So we did this at the end of every practice and had them come together in a circle and share with the group what they felt they did well and what they accomplished that practice, because we felt, well, and from a psychology perspective, we tend to remember all of those mistakes that you've made. And so just bringing into the conversation some of those other assets and strengths was helpful for our athletes.
And just from, coach's perspective, sometimes I think when we try to implement these exercises, we do tend to think that it requires maybe an hour session, maybe it requires an additional session on top of our already training schedule, or the set training schedule. And so this was an easy mesh. We already allocate 15 minutes at the end of our sessions for proper cool down technique and for stretching. And so it was really easy for us to implement this during our stretching circle where the girls were already together. And I think, again, it just kind of reinforced the competence piece of saying out loud that I did something well was really great to hear from the athletes, because like Katrina said, athletes don't tend to focus on that. Their first focus goes towards the negative. And so it was really great to hear the athletes say it out loud in front of their peers and in front of their coaches as well, and have that confidence to do it.
All right, the final need, relatedness, which is the extent to which the athlete feels connected to others. So coaches can help support this by just getting to know your athlete as an individual and not just as an athlete, as well as things like creating a space for athletes to connect in a way that's meaningful. So this can be both in and out of training. And Poonam's got a great example of what this looked like with her team.
So, for our team and our program, we've done this for years, but we have a bud system. And we implement this at the beginning of each year. And we have a senior or more senior athlete paired up with a junior rookie. And so this has always been great because it allows, the newer students who are going through that transition to feel supported right off the bat and feel like they have somebody to go to and rely on. We also use the bud system to check in throughout the year and also to be accountable for one another. So that's been really great. And another thing that we did this year was after our season, we were able to watch our Canadian women's team compete in the Olympic qualifying match, which they hadn't reached in, I believe, 28 years, which was insane and awesome. And so for team bonding activity, you know, we provided them with some money and they were able to go and buy, you know, some pizza, grab some candy, and just have a really, you know, just a lounging time. And they were able to put the game up on the TV and just hang out. And so this is something that we try to do throughout the year as well, to really get the girls to connect on a more personal level and off the field. And I think what it also does is, you know, it kind of reinforces the fact that each individual's background, their cultural backgrounds, you know, where they come from, what type of sporting background they come from, it all just kind of paints a picture of who they are as an individual. And it also reinforces the fact that it's really important to understand who they are on that personal level, so that you can communicate and connect with them on the field. And so this is something that's, you know, really important for us, that's relatedness piece for our program, and it has been, but also for me personally as a coach and for my philosophy.
All right. And just kind of as a reminder, those three needs we talked about: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Supporting those needs can help your athletes to reach that more intrinsic form of motivation.